For this session, our moderator will be none other than Ahmad Alhendawi, Secretary General of the World Organization of the Scout Movement, a movement of young people with over 54 million youths who are active through 170 national Scout organizations. He is a familiar name and face to all, so join me in welcoming him and the other panel speakers. Ladies and gentlemen.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Great. Welcome to the first session of the World Non-Formal Education Forum. Are you excited to be here? Yeah. Great. So I have a great panel actually to start the discussion, focusing on unpacking a few of these terms around non-formal education. And before introducing my panelists, I just would like to say how excited I am personally to really bring all the actors in the sector to talk about non-formal education. This morning we were talking about our challenge and what we do sometimes, because in the global discussion around education, we often find we actors in non-formal education have to tweak ourselves and position ourselves somehow so we can make the discussion around non-formal education visible. So I think it's just fitting that we're able to have a convening for our own sake and common cause in discussing how we work and how we empower and support young people. So for this panel, I will have Professor Jürgen Williams, who is a professor of public management and governance at the Vienna University of Economics and Business. My dear friend Monica Vorheller, CEO or Chief Executive of Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizenship. And we have Margaret Sachs Israel, Regional Education Advisor at UNICEF, and my friend as well, Thais Correz from Scouting Brazil. Welcome and thanks for joining me. As you can see, we will be using a slide for some of the questions, and I have been asked actually, if it's not fun, it's not non-formal education as well, right? So I understand the desire to also use this tool for fun. So I would encourage you just to use, with one word, what does non-formal education means to you? Use the slide one more time, and I would encourage you, what does non-formal education means? And I would use that also to encourage the panel. So we'll be coming back to some of the results as you provide them. So, freedom, fun, empowerment, skills, resilience, a vehicle for change. That's great, because actually your words are very helpful in helping us crafting a definition for non-formal education. So my first question maybe to start this, and I would like to ask you, Margaret, to help me with this. We work in the sector and we approach non-formal education from different angles. Each one of our organizations, we have our own method or tool for implementing it, but we rarely come together to try actually to define it. And the challenge here, we kind of defining non-formal education by what is not. It's a non-formal. How you would define it yourself?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the question.
Yeah, pass it on. Yeah, pass it on. We can use this one.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you very much for the question. Yes, I think that is one of the key issues around non-formal education, because it actually starts with a non. But it's not at all a non. And I think that is one of the things that we would like to end up at the end of the 3 days here, to really come up with a clear definition among ourselves. Now, let me start by reminding you of the existing definition, at least with one, that comes from the International Standard Classification of Education in 2011. And this definition starts by saying that NFE, I mean non-formal education, is clearly an activity that is intentional, it's organized, and it's planned, and it's provided by an educational provider. So in that sense, it seems to be pretty close to formal education. Now, how then in the definition it becomes different? It is also defined as being an alternative and a complement to formal education, but in the lifelong learning process. Now here the interesting addition of lifelong learning already provides a change, because what's the difference between, formal education that is provided between a certain age range and in certain institutions and lifelong learning, is that lifelong learning recognizes that it actually is not only limited to a certain age range or to a certain type of provision or certain modality, but it goes way beyond that. So I think that's the first thing to remember. The second thing is that it's also defined as being cross-sectoral, meaning it does not only include education, but it also refers to health, it refers to citizenship, it refers to, let's say, agriculture, or very much vocational training. So there's many sectors that are covered and included in non-formal education. It is also multi-beneficiary, and I'll come back to that, and very much context-specific. So all of that points to a great flexibility. And it is fundamentally diverse by nature. Diverse how? Diverse in terms of target groups. So target group could be, for example, out-of-school children and adolescents. It could be primary school children that have never gone to school. It could be adolescents that dropped out at the age of 12, at the age of 16. So you can already imagine there are different needs already for that group. But it's also adults that have never been to school and that might be illiterate. Or it could be workers that require upskilling and reskilling in a fast changing world, as we heard this morning. It is diverse in terms of context, duration, delivery, and outcome. As you can imagine, the different target groups that I just mentioned also require different responses. And lastly, by provider. There are a number of ministries that do provide non-formal education. It's not only the Ministry of Education, but it's also the Ministry of Health, it's the Ministry of Labor, it's the Ministry of Women's Affairs, etc. So that is also one of the complexities and challenges, because how do we coordinate the work of all these different ministries? And then, very importantly, we know that civil society is one of the main providers of non-information education. So how do we ensure that ministries work with civil societies, or with the private sector, or with churches? I mean, all of these are key providers. Just to give you an idea of the complexity that defines non-formal education.
So, if I can pick on this one, I ask you, Professor Williams. I mean, many of our friends here, we do what we do, and we don't really reflect a lot and zoom out and think this is where it fits in the education spectrum. We just do it. And we know that empowers individuals and young people. So if you, to help basically clarifying where that spectrum of non-formal education fits in the global education agenda, where you would fit that?
Yes, I completely agree with that, but I think the way you said it, like it emerges, we do it, and so on. And I think one of the main reasons is because someone else is not doing it. If formal education would actually be completely reaching all the goals and training everyone that has to be trained, then I think there would be maybe less need for non-formal education. I think there are quite some old theories on that, but it's the same. Like if the state offers something, if they don't offer it, then non-profits, civil society will pop up and do it. And I think that's it, and that's also what I hear in your definition. It's you say it's very broad, it's multi-stakeholder, and that's very often things that are not done or not sufficiently done through formal education. So
it's interesting actually, because Mario talked about basically defining the term. You are talking about recognizing non-formal education and its value. And it's interesting actually, you're a professor at the university and you say, we don't do it well all the time, right? Is that what you're saying?
Some universities, no, but I think we have to be honest there, and I think there's always going to be a formal system, there's always going to be an informal system. I think it's two very complementary systems sometimes. It will almost, I hope, they will not be replaceable. And that's because formal education is it's good in being formal. It's standardized. It's like we look at a big group of people. Mainly, so at universities, it's 18 and older, but primary and secondary school, if you take the whole range, it's from 6 to 22 or something, and we really look at the basic need that all these people have, and that is our formal education system. Yeah. And it works in a more or less efficient way to give them a basic answer to the needs they have. But I think just non-formal education will always be there, as you said. For the skills we do not give through formal education, for the groups of people we do not reach with them. If certain new groups come in, migrants or something, that was very clear. We needed more non-formal education for more specific needs. So that is, it always will be there. So I think, I guess formal education in many countries is good. Yeah. I just think if non-formal education pops up more in certain areas, that's very often a signal that the formal system is not delivering what it could deliver. Yeah,
that's very helpful. Monica, I mean, in the past 10 years or so, we've been seeing like a number of initiatives coming about driving attention to education, saying first, we need to increase access to primary education, then we enhance our narratives to start saying, actually, it's not only access, it's also access to quality education, and then we top that even further, saying we need basically to equip young people with the skills that are relevant to the future. So it's an interesting narrative shift from access to quality, and they're recognizing that it might be even too late by the time they join, because it's now about a skills competition. So where do you see non-formal education driving that further?
I see from the, and I think my mic too has
Yeah.
From the Ban Ki-moon Center's perspective, thanks for the question. The former Secretary General of the United Nations could have picked any, literally any subject matter to take forward. And he chose education for a very good reason, to be the key of his legacy engagement still. The Ban Ki-moon Center is exactly at this juncture. So what is needed for the education of the future? And I'd say it consists of 3 components. One is knowledge on the SDGs. Yeah. Second is global citizen values. And third is 21st century skills. So what are these 21st century skills? And I think non-formal education has a vested contribution to that. And I actually want to take the opportunity to applaud all of you, of the big 6 and also of the not big 6 that are sitting here, because you have proven in the last couple of years that with implementing your mandate, you have literally changed the world. You have stepped up non-formal education to a degree unprecedented. So please, a round of applause to all of you who are advocates for change. So, thanks for your work. You're the advocates for the SDGs, you're the advocates for the 21st century skills. Indeed, in non-formal education, we need more collaboration, empathy, leadership skills. We need to be aware, have a broader perspective of the global challenges, rather than just looking at our nation, our city, our tribe, our clan. We need to have the global citizen values that we carry out into the world. Global citizen values are basically what you stand for, what you subscribe to. Give me a show of hands, who of you works on the SDGs, on the Sustainable Development Goals? Wow. This is wonderful, because, you know, tendentially on the globe, when I'm speaking to audiences, maybe 5 to 7% of the audiences know what the SDGs are all about. You guys do know, so you are the ambassadors of them. In non-formal education, of course, we have troubles. We have the troubles that non-formal education is not as well recognized, probably not as well funded, probably even not as well known of, because the definition is lacking, or because people say, well, it's volunteerism and that doesn't count. I believe it's exactly a conference like this is at the juncture of getting to know one another and managing to have a system that is working on collaboration in the non-formal sector that will make the sector even stronger than it is already now.
Yeah, that's the thing is, I mean, let me build on this and talk a little bit about this notion of complementing. So we talk about there's lack of dialogue generally between the formal and the non-formal education sector. Yet we're expected to complement that. And they don't usually accept the compliments when they tell them we can complement you, right? where do you think the complementarity nature, how we can work in that, and we ensure that formal education sector is delivering its objectives, and non-formal education can complement, in some places, I would dare to say replace. What's your take?
So thank you.
With Mike?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll use this.
Yes, same issue. So, like answering to your question, I think like this complementary role, like is super important for us to recognize that formal education not always will deliver all the skills that is needed for the young people out in the world, in this changing world that we have, like so many challenges that we face that we are not expecting, that no one teaches us in the classrooms. But for sure, there are some places where the formal education doesn't even has the possibility to reach.
Like where? I mean,
for example, in South Sudan, you have 2 million kids out of school, and that the government doesn't even like have the capability to now get them access to school. Or even like many places, for example, when you have refugees, refugees, they arrive in a refugee camp, and for building a school, you need like professors and books and the classrooms themselves, like to prepare these people, to take to prepare the professors from the refugees themselves, or to bring someone like from outside. It takes a lot. It takes a lot of time, lots of structure to do it. If you have someone already with some activities, prepare like a structured method to deliver these activities, it is already a great learning that these children, these young people will have access to, that they not necessarily, like, they will not have access to the formal school, they can have through non-formal education methods.
That's so interesting you say, like in countries like torn by war, the issue with access to education or even providing education, most often we see non-formal education methods are helping basically providing that beacon of hope for young people until they integrate basically in a formal education. Maria, I would like to ask you, are we still facing a global education crisis? What are the numbers out there?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think the numbers were mentioned several times by the speakers this morning, but I think it's good to repeat them because, I mean, they're just staggering. So right now, I mean, these are just official statistics. We have more than 250 million children and adolescents that are actually out of school across the world. There are more than 260 young people that are not in education, training, and employment. And then also, I think it's important to remember we have more than 770 million adults that are illiterate. Now, I would like to remind you that the adult age starts as 15 plus. So we're still talking about adolescents. So these are just the official numbers. Often we know statistics are not entirely exact. So it's basically the tip of the iceberg. And I would also like to underline what Florence said this morning. We do also speak about a learning crisis, and I think we should not forget that. So it's not just about who has access and who has not access, but who is in school and is not learning. Right now we know it's more than 600 million, and projections show that if we continue with the current trends, we will have more than 850 million adolescents that will not have acquired the basic skills in reading and numeracy, by 2030. So not only do we not provide access, we also produce young people, basically our future, that are not able to participate in life and decent work, which is an extreme worrisome situation.
Yeah, Professor Williams, I mean, how we can make sense of it all? On one hand, we talk about a challenge, basically, education crisis, a global crisis in education and learning today, with major gaps for enrollment, for opportunities for learning. At the same time, the world is changing really fast, and even for those who are enrolled and they have access to education, they actually cannot keep up with the skills needed. I mean, how we can really make sense of it all?
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point, because what was discussed now, that's some kind of a complementarity that still is like substitutable. Like if there's non-formal education, but it grows enough, then formal education might take over in these areas. preferably. I think indeed what you say, I think it's more moving, just because of changes in the world, to a complementarity where both elements, formal and non-formal education, they're both necessary, but each of them is insufficient. So you really need both to grow. And I think on an individual level, you see it. I think all of us know that if young people apply only with a degree, it's just a check and that's it. So you also need on top these skills that you learn in non-formal education. That's on an individual level, but it's also on a society level. Like on a society level, you need the formal education well developed, and pity that in several areas, not even that is there. But also, even in well developed or whatever kind of term you give to it, you also see that on the society level, non-formal education is more needed due to this more homogeneous set of needs that is there. And it's both on the individual and the society level. So I think why it's such a topic now, that it's really this complementarity is changing. So you really need both components to deal with the problems that are there.
I just would like to remind everyone, you can still go to Slido and you can ask your questions that I'll be able to bring them to the panel. But I would like to move on this and talk about lifelong learning in a second. I mean, a wise person once said, the illiterate in the 21st century will be those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn again, which sounds exhausting, actually. But it also sounds, well, start seeing it. You can't just live with a degree for the rest of your life, and it seems a lot more actually experts and even practitioners, they start going for executive education and additional courses. That process of lifelong learning and non-formal education, I think there's more agility in non-formal education to allow it happening, because at a 30, 40, 50, you cannot go to university for 3 more years, but you can go a refresher, trainings, and join other activities. Where do you see lifelong learning for the conversation we'll be having over the next 3 days?
Lifelong learning lifelong learning is
Yeah.
Lifelong learning. Lifelong learning is incredibly important, definitely, because it takes the longer cycle perspective. And I do want to add that particularly non-formal education is often filling gaps, as we have discussed, in crisis situation, correct? So where formal education is toppled because of circumstances in a country, often it's non-formal education that is taking over. Secondly, what I have observed is non-formal education is actually faster, much faster than formal education. We are advocating very much that the SDGs find manifestation into all cycles in the lifelong learning process. And it is often the non-formal entities that can pick that up fast, while we are still struggling to enshrine it in curricula and syllabi in universities and schools. And so again, the non-formal ones are the pioneers in a lifelong span. And I would also say that as a third point, in developing countries, the non-formal sector, for like cradle to grave literally, has a role that is unprecedented, because often there is inadequate funding or even access to formal education. So yes, lifelong learning, and I think the EU has fantastic documents in this regard, and not only documents but implementation track records, how lifelong learning is actually benefiting societies, altering societies. Some countries, particularly in the OECD, have integrated it very well. Others are very much lagging behind, but the benefits are undoubted.
Yeah. So let me just take an offline slide for a second and ask you by raising your hand to help me. How many of you finding it difficult to explain to others what you do when you engage in non-formal education? Good. If you wonder why you are here, I think that's so. Just trying to bring more clarity in this. One of the questions here is easier for you to explain if you have a master degree or a diploma, if you're attending a university. So the question of recognition ties, how we can translate what we do to actually an understandable, basically, language or competencies, if that's the currency that we can use, by explaining and appreciating the engagement in non-formal education?
That's a very good question that I try very hard to do, like in my daily life, mainly now that I'm in this young age of hunting for jobs, and you need to showcase that you actually have the skills, but you don't have a certificate necessarily for it. Like me arriving and saying, oh, I learned it in the Scouts. Like some of them may know it, But the learn by doing that we have, like when you have a non-formal education, you have, for example, like this teamwork, the learn by doing, the skills that we acquire, and then how do we say we actually have them? Like we can only show it. So I think it's also like part of the system to actually start recognizing like this. I think this is one of the important things of this panel for us, like to bring it out to the world to say we need to recognize these other kinds of skills that not necessarily are on certificates, because they are essential. They are essential for whatever it needs to be done.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, Margit, I would like to bring a question from a slide. I mean, first the question was also talking about how to make the case for investment in non-formal education with more, basically we're kind of fragmented sector, we're not well coordinated, and how we can make the case, and we talked earlier about the most important partnership for education is called the Global Partnership for Education, where actually they said non-formal education is not a priority in their spending, which is like a scary thing. So if you think making the case for non-formal education, is it true that it's us to blame because we're not organized and we cannot make a good case for ourselves? Or where's the gap?
Okay, now this is like
Okay, I think we...
seems to be a feature of this panel. Anyway, no, it's not us to blame. I think this is an age-old difficulty of non-formal education, meaning that it's not properly recognized. And this is why I would claim that we do need a rigorous approach to non-formal education, which I will come back to in a minute. But just to respond to this first question about the investment case for non-formal education, I think what is very important is to produce evidence. That is where we have to start with, in order to convince, on the one hand, governments and also donors to actually pay attention and invest in non-formal education. Now, how that can be done, UNICEF has developed in 2010 and launched, together with the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, the Out-of-School Children Initiative. Now, this initiative is implemented through studies that provide statistical data to governments on the situation of out-of-school children in their country, who they are, where they are, and what are the barriers that prevented them from accessing educational opportunity. It also looks at policies, existing policies, and makes recommendations on what could be done, what kind of strategies could be put in place to share this information and change the situation. Now, a couple of studies have been undertaken in various countries, and the result was that countries have developed non-formal education policies, such as in Haiti and others. In the Philippines, the alternative learning system that already existed, based on the information provided, was then revised and strengthened. So again, I'm coming back to evidence, which is highly important. A second type of evidence, which is very important, is good practice, is to really speak about what has been done in many countries. And I'm sure around the room there are many, many very rich experiences, and I'm very much looking forward to learning more from you. And these kind of good practices have to be shared. They have to be shared with governments that are sometimes struggling to put in place effective NFE. So it's about, also proving that the practice has actually been effective, and then show it, and then try to see how it can be adapted. So that's my answer to the first question.
Thank you. I mean, Professor Williams, can help us with this popular question that is topping here from Sarah. Are we missing something critical in this discussion by keep talking about learning when NFE is often about the practices and confidence?
Yes. No, I think, yes, but isn't that, so to be really honest, so I see on a daily basis people in the formal system. I think it's independent from it. I really think you can also have more successful students in the formal system, being more confident and so on. And that's also something that we have to learn them. So it's, maybe it's not always, I think the question has more to do with that it's not always that clear what we are learning in non-formal education. And I was thinking about it based on the previous question too. I think, so what's the case for non-formal education was one of the things. What's the investment case? And I think investors, they think in return on investment. So it can be financial return on investment or social return on investment. So it is, I completely agree, better documenting what we are doing or what non-formal education is doing, but also the output. So not only like, look, we're doing A, B, and C, but this is the output. This is actually the return of investing. And I guess investors, whether they are businesses, organizations, governments, they know there are difficult structures. So that's not their big issue. Like universities can also be quite complex. I think it has more to do with showing what the output of the complex structure is. And there are methodologies really to measure social return on investment financially, but also, and I guess that's where non-formal education will have the extra value. Also the societal value. It doesn't only bring skills to the people, it also brings social capital in the neighborhood where there is a new Scouts movement and so on and so on. And that can be really shown as an output. So to come back to the question of Sarah, I guess that's, it's maybe more about that. It's not always clear what is taught in non-formal education.
I'm not sure which Sarah was that, but also acknowledge my friend Sarah, the chief executive of WAGS here. So thank you for the good question. And another good question, in my view, that is important. We strengthen here that recognize the importance of skills and competencies. Yodo is asking, that's all fine. We need to push basically for skills development. But Thais, how about values? Whenever we talk about equipping young people for skills for the future, you find many are talking about employability skills all the time. And I often ask myself, are we building malls and companies or nations and societies? If you do so, then you need really to broaden that skills and then focusing in values for being an active global citizen today, which in my view, a good citizen is a good employee as well.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the magical features of Scouting.
Okay, that's the promotion now. So
we need to do a bit of promotion. But seriously, like when we also talk about non-formal education, yes, skills for employability, but there is a lot of values that can be passed through this method, through the non-formal method, the non-formal education. The problem, of course, a challenge that we will face is how to prepare, because the adult who is like delivering this process, who is like following this process, also needs to have these values to well pass them. And this is a challenge that is faced. But of course, it's essential for us, like in this process, to also bring these values of, because we see polarization everywhere nowadays, each more with the access to internet. Like so many polarizations of discussions, that if we can bring the values of empathy, of like looking after each other, this is something that can also be practiced when we have this interaction, when we have and that's why we see, for example, many formal schools, going a bit in other questions that are being asked, like when we have, for example, Escola da Ponte in Portugal, it's the formal system, but they are also using many methods of non-formal education to bring the students together to discuss, to actually interact more and have a more humane experience that is for sure in the center of non-formal education when we talk about values, I would say.
Thank you, Thais. I mean, Monica, on this relationship between us and them, non-formal and formal, the question from Peter here is, do you see a space for partnership between the two, and how we can strengthen that synergy and complementarity between the two?
As you know, there is immense complementarity. I mean, we wouldn't all sit here would we not believe that non-formal has a lot to contribute, and that probably the shares need to be equaled out. When you're charting it, or at least when I was thinking about my intervention here, I said to myself, so what are the differences between formal and non-formal? And indeed, non-formal, I think, can adapt to fast changes, while formal is slower in change. Non-formal has little recognition. Formal has a lot of, I'd even call it, overemphasis. Non-formal has voluntarism. Formal is very institutionalized. Non-formal is inadequately funded. And formal is often part of state budgets, and hence has a lot of traction. So what are the common denominators? And I think the common denominators really are what Margaret said before. It is the breaking of the silos. Non-formal breaks the silos. Formal is very much still in the silos. What we need for the workforce in the future, and let me quote Jack Ma, maybe you know Jack Ma, he's the founder of Alibaba. He says exactly that. We need people that have agency. We need people who have a global citizen mindset. We need people who know the 21st century skills of leadership, empathy, conflict resolution, team building. And this is exactly what non-formal education does. Hence, it is mutually supportive. It is necessary, both of it. And we will see that the trend for non-formal skill building will increase. This is the trajectory that I see. How do we go about it? Well, we are mightier the more we are. And in fact, having the Big Six here represented today, let me challenge you to go on a Big Six safari. And I don't mean one where you shoot anyone, but one where you maybe take selfies with someone of the other Big Five that you don't belong to. Meet someone of the other agencies, and probably also the small ones. Because the more the network is connected, the stronger it will be.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Invitation accepted. So we will. I think this was a useful discussion to start really and set some of the important questions that we'll be exploring over the next 2 to 3 days. Part of the importance of this convening for us is really to recognize that the discussion here, we often each live in our own orbit, whether in scouting or in guiding or in YMCA, YWCA, peer network, other youth organizations who are doing, and we all think like we're the only one who are challenged with volunteering, retention of volunteers, recruitment, or innovating, leveraging technology. I think part of what we're trying to do here is really to step up a little bit and think not only of our organizational challenge, but also from our sector commitment, how we can bring the sector so we can all actually bring more life-changing experience for more young people. It was said that 250 million children out of school. It's even more said that half of the world's population under the age of 25. And the thing is, all of us combined here, the 70 organizations who are present with all our branches and country offices and national organizations, we all combine together. We have a responsibility for the generation and for young people. So it's also about breaking that organizational tendency that we are comfortable in our own bubble and thinking how we can actually collaborate. So let me challenge you as well to find opportunities to collaborate with each other. Find who is coming from your national office or from your region, from other organizations. Look for opportunities where we can expand these connections, learn from each other, and be open. You might judge others, you might judge some of what you hear, as Pia said this morning. We might be doing a Scoutish way or guiding way or basically UN way. I think let's just keep the judging when you board your flight out of Rio. For now, just be open for learning. Thank you very much for this panel. Back to you.